Helen was dancing alone when she realized, at 57, she had forgotten what it was like to be seen. Not out of pity, not out of habit, but out of desire. When Rick appeared on that dance floor, she thought she had finally found someone who would choose her completely. But then she discovered he was still getting calls from his ex-wife. And the question she didn't want to ask came back. Was she also there just to forget? Was there still time to be truly loved? Before we begin, tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from? We want to connect with you. Let's discover together what Helen learned about loving herself. This story begins with Helen applying lipstick in front of the kitchen mirror. The bathroom one reflected too much. The kitchen one was smaller, older, hanging from a crooked nail, but showed only what she needed to see. It was Friday, almost 7 at night, and there was no one waiting for her. She had lived alone since her youngest son left. The older one called every 2 weeks, with the urgency of someone who still doesn't know how absence weighs. The husband faded away slowly. First, shorter words, then missing presences. When he finally left, Helen had already learned not to count on anyone who stays out of habit. And her mother, whom she cared for almost 10 years, left in silence, leaving the house too big and her too small inside it. How do we realize we're no longer living, just existing? Since then, the days seemed like a movie that restarts without anyone having pressed play. Coffee made always in the same cup. The tablecloth changed on Sunday. The radio on low, just a fake presence. The supermarket became an outing. Helen knew every aisle, every shelf, every employee who worked the afternoon shift. She always bought the same things: whole grain bread, skim milk, a fruit that sometimes spoiled in the fridge. TV became mute company, on the same channel, always at the same volume, more out of habit than interest. And the body. The body was there, but it was as if it had been stopped for a long time. She went up and down stairs without feeling the movement, washed dishes without noticing the warm water, changed clothes without looking in the mirror. Helen wasn't sad. She was discreet. So discreet that sometimes she forgot her own reflection. She blended in with the furniture, with order, with the silence that occupied every corner. It was by chance that she heard about the party. She was at the market, getting bread, always the same bread, when 2 women talked about a renovated bowling alley. Now with black lights, 80s soundtrack and people our age, you know. They laughed, talked about glitter, Madonna. Helen stood still in the bread section, pretending to choose, but listening to every word like someone hearing a language they recognize but haven't spoken in years. Do we recognize the exact moment when something inside us awakens? Helen didn't turn around, but she felt something warm up inside her. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a shock. At home, she looked up the party's name on her phone. She found photos, illuminated dance floors, people smiling, exaggerated clothes, artificial glitter. The description said, "Every Friday, 9 p.m., to remember what should never have been forgotten." Helen closed the site, then opened it again, and once more. The next day, she went to a costume shop. It had been years since she entered a place like that. The attendant was young, anxious, and tried to suggest something more appropriate. Helen smiled and asked to look alone. That's when she saw the lime green dress. Tight, sparkling, almost improper. It was the same shade as the dress she wore in 1986 at 18, the night she danced until her body hurt, to the sound of "Take on Me." Back then, she thought life could fit entirely in a chorus. But what happens when we decide to stop being appropriate and go back to being authentic? Now, she just wanted to remember what it felt like to be alive. The following Friday, she got ready slowly, applied blue eyeshadow, fixed her hair, put on heels with the insecurity of someone who hasn't stepped outside herself in a long time. She took a taxi, arrived 15 minutes early, stayed in the car observing the facade of the old bowling alley, the lights pulsing inside as if time had really gone back. She breathed deeply and got out. Have you ever been afraid of going back to being who you really are? The hall was bigger than it seemed from outside. An old bowling alley with the smell of waxed wood and violet lights dancing on the walls like water. The drawings of the old lanes were still there, somewhat faded, like marks of a time that doesn't hide, just transforms. Screens with old music videos alternated with LED effects. Madonna, Duran Duran, Prince flashing in saturated colors. A mirrored ball spun in the center of the ceiling, throwing shards of light on people's faces, creating a kaleidoscope of movement. It was exaggerated, almost kitsch, but Helen found it beautiful. She entered with measured steps, observing everything in silence. She saw women with colored tulle skirts, neon shirts that glowed under black light, makeup with glitter that sparkled with every movement. Men with leather jackets, dyed hair, smiles too wide, broad gestures that took up space without asking permission. They were all older, faces that carried stories, bodies that knew life, and they all seemed more alive than any person she had seen in recent months. The air was thick with perfume, artificial smoke, and sweat mixed with nostalgia. It was like entering a time machine that ran on electronic beats. But when did she feel that her body remembered something her mind had forgotten? She ordered a drink she couldn't remember the name of, something sweet that glowed under black light. She stayed in the corner, leaning against a pillar, watching the movement of the dance floor like someone watching a movie. She tried to fit in, sway discreetly to the rhythm, but her movements seemed too small, too contained, until the music changed. Sweet dreams. The first synthesizers echoed through the hall like an ancestral call. The first beat lit something inside her, not in her mind, but in her chest, in her belly, in her legs. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and then danced. She started slowly. Shoulders first, remembering how to let go. Then arms, creating waves in the air. Her hips found the rhythm on their own, as if they had never stopped. And when she realized it, she was in the middle of the dance floor, spinning with half-closed eyes, feet almost off the ground, the lime green dress capturing and reflecting every spark of light. It wasn't nostalgia. It was something more visceral. It was presence. It was the body remembering it still knew how to be a temple of movement. For the first time in years, she was there, with her whole body, with her whole soul. It was at that moment that he appeared. Do we attract the right people? Precisely when we stop looking. Tall, unshaven, black shirt with the first 2 buttons open. He said nothing, just approached, extended his hand. She hesitated for a beat, and then accepted. They danced one song, then another, and another, without talking, without laughing loudly, just bodies understanding what to do. At the end of the 3rd song he asked, "Can I know your name?" "Helen," she said. He smiled. "Rick." There was nothing special about that dialogue, but she felt something different. A kind of space, as if he wasn't trying to know where she came from, who she lived with, what she carried, just who she is now. But can we live only in the present, when we carry so much past? The following Friday, he was there, and the next one too. They developed their own language, made of small and meaningful gestures. They danced together always in the same corner, near old lane number 3, where the light fell more softly. Sometimes they kissed between songs, slow kisses that tasted of lipstick and night. Sometimes they didn't. They just stayed close, feeling each other's warmth mixed with the crowd's warmth. They never exchanged phone numbers, never arranged anything, never talked about the week, about work, about family. It was as if they existed only in those hours, in that space suspended between Friday night and Saturday morning. Rick knew her rhythm, when she needed space to move alone, when she wanted to be led, when her eyes asked for silence. And she knew his, the way he smiled before a slower song, how he held her waist as if he had all the time in the world, how he looked at the ceiling when he was completely surrendering to the sound. That they both knew. Every Friday in that place, under that light, there was a meeting. And she didn't need to explain anything. Neither did he. What happens when someone wants to know us beyond the fantasy? And we're still not sure if we're ready. It was on the 7th or 8th Friday that Rick changed his step. They had danced as always, both sweaty, laughing softly between songs. But when the beat of time after time approached its end, he held her hand more firmly. It wasn't an invitation. It was an attempt at permanence. "I'd like to see you outside of here," he said, almost whispering in her ear, his voice competing with the sound. "Outside?" She repeated, surprised. "Coffee, maybe. Sunday afternoon. No music, no neon." Helen was silent. Part of her warmed up. The same part that had been awakening under those lights for weeks. The other retreated, like someone stepping back from a door that opens too quickly. For weeks, she had lived that connection as a good secret. A suspended space, free from the world's demands. No past, no future. Just two bodies dancing, recognizing each other by instinct. But now, what did he want to see outside of there? She wasn't someone else. She never lied. But there, dancing, she could forget a little about the Helen who lives alone, who collects her own clothes from the line, who crosses corridors that are too long. Why are we afraid of being loved for who we really are? "I don't think Sunday works," she replied. "That's okay," he said, with the same smile as always, but his gaze a little more distant. "Another day, maybe," she completed, wanting to hold on to the air. He nodded. But when the music returned, he didn't pull her back. He went to dance with another woman, and Helen realized the magic wasn't just between them. It was also the space, the fantasy, the pact of the unspoken. And now, perhaps that had broken. During the week, Helen thought about accepting. She looked for nearby cafes, imagined what she would say, what clothes she would wear. She even wanted to write a message, something they had never done. Do we lose people? Out of fear of really having them. Even so, the following Friday she dressed more carefully, used different eyeshadow, gold instead of blue, softer, more real, a lighter blouse. Arrived 15 minutes early, like someone wanting to show availability. She wanted to demonstrate that she was open, that she could be herself, even outside the neon, even under the harsh light of day. But Rick didn't smile the same way. He was tense, less present, stiffer shoulders, gaze lost somewhere beyond the dance floor. They danced only 2 songs before he pulled her to the corner, away from the movement, near where the high tables covered with empty glasses were. "Sorry, I'm kind of out of it today," he said, running his hand over his face with exhaustion. "Is everything okay?" she asked, lightly touching his arm. "My ex called, again. Says I'm hiding in ridiculous little parties instead of resolving things with my daughter." The word little parties cut Helen like a thin blade. Ridiculous. Was that how she saw that place? Was that how his ex-wife saw it? Was that how he let them see it? "You have a daughter?" she asked, without judgment, but feeling something reorganize inside her chest. "I do, but she hasn't talked to me in months." Maybe rightfully so. How do we deal with the discovery? that we weren't the only one running away. Helen felt something break inside. Not because he had a daughter, not because he had a past, but because, for the first time, she realized he wasn't there for the now. He was there to escape, exactly like she had been in the first weeks. They weren't building something new. They were sharing a hiding place. She tried to smile, but the smile came crooked. Rick held her hand for one more moment, then let go. "You're different," he said. "I don't know if that's good," she replied. On the dance floor, the lights kept flashing, but inside her, the dancing had stopped. For the first time, Helen wanted to leave before the last song. But can we dance alone, after having danced with someone? The following Friday, Helen didn't go. The makeup stayed on the sink. The dress hung on the chair. She made tea, watched the steam rise and disappear. No notifications on the phone. They had never exchanged numbers. No broken promises. But his absence weighed more than expected. She spent Saturday with a thick silence in the house. Tried to organize old photos, but stopped at the second image. Tried to listen to music, but nothing played like before. Even Sweet Dreams sounded hollow. She missed the small gestures. The way Rick held her waist as if he had time. The smell of him mixed with the smoke from the dance floor. The pauses between songs, when they looked at each other without needing to speak. How do we discover that the pain isn't from losing someone, but from losing ourselves again? If Helen's story is touching something in you, if you've also felt invisible, subscribe to the channel for more stories of new beginnings. And leave your like before we continue. Thank you. The pain wasn't just from him disappearing. It was from her disappearing again too. During the week, she tried to convince herself it was nothing. A flirtation, a late pastime, but the body disagreed. It was in the body that she perceived it. The weight of her own body. Dragged steps. The desire to see no one. Finally, she understood. It wasn't about him. It was about her. Because, for a few weeks, she felt seen. Not because of a man, but for being alive. For being dancing. For having said yes to what she wanted, even without knowing its name. And now, that was also silent. Could she still dance, even alone? Is there still time, at 57, to be whole, just for herself? Time passed differently that week. It was no longer the silence that bothered, but the echo of a desire that refused to die. Helen caught herself dancing alone in the kitchen, to the sound of an old radio that had been silent for years. Bare feet on the cold floor, cup forgotten in hand, body remembering movements that seemed to have a life of their own. She danced while drying dishes, while waiting for coffee to brew, while folding clothes. Small movements that no one saw, but that she felt like small revolutions. The body had a taste of freedom now, and didn't want to return to silence. She didn't know if Rick would return. Didn't know if she wanted him to. That there was something in her that had awakened. And that, yes, mattered. It was hers. Always had been. On Friday, the sky was cloudy, heavy with rain that had been threatening to fall since afternoon. It started raining at the end of the day. A heavy rain that left the house humid, dark, full of long shadows. Helen thought about retreating. She lit a candle in the living room, left the lime green dress on the armchair back, like someone testing an invitation to herself. She passed by the blue eyeshadow, touched it with her finger, saw the quick reflection in the microwave, and suddenly, without any plan, without any expectation, she started getting ready. Have you ever felt when your body knows something, that your mind is still discovering? She passed by the blue eyeshadow, touched it with her finger, looked at the quick reflection in the microwave, and suddenly, without any plan, she started getting ready. It was no longer a gesture of courage. It was almost instinct. as if the body knew the way. She dressed calmly, painted her lips slowly, chose a song on her phone, Dancing with Myself, by Billy Idol, and while listening, she laughed alone. There was something melancholic and liberating in that chorus. The taxi arrived quickly. The city seemed different. Fogged windows, wet asphalt, traffic lights reflected on the ground. Helen looked at everything as if it were the first time. She wasn't looking for anything, but she wasn't running away either. What happens when we finally understand that we don't need an audience to be who we are? Upon arriving, she stayed a few minutes at the entrance. The lights still danced on the facade of the old bowling alley. People entering, laughing, shaking umbrellas. She didn't wait for anyone. Didn't search for familiar eyes. Just breathed deeply and entered. The music was loud but familiar. The same mirrored balls spun slowly. The dance floor was full, and even so she found space. A small emptiness in the center that seemed to have waited for her. She didn't look for Rick. Didn't imagine explanations. Didn't think about what was, or what could have been. For the first time, she was there just for herself. Not as an answer, but as presence. Is true freedom. When we no longer need a reason to be happy. When the beat of "Don't You Want Me" began, Helen closed her eyes. The first note slid inside like warm honey. Her shoulders released all at once, freeing a tension she didn't even know she carried. Her hands rose slowly, drawing shapes in the air that only she understood. Her body moved with the certainty of someone who no longer needed to be seen to exist, of someone who no longer needed permission to take up space. She danced, not as escape, not as hope, but as someone who had returned to being whole, present, alive. The lights flashed around, creating a kaleidoscope of colors on her skin, on her dress, on her loose hair. People passed, laughed, danced along, but she was in her own universe. A universe where music wasn't a soundtrack, it was pulse. It was blood. It was the rhythm of her own heart finally in sync with itself. On the third song of the night, the beat changed. It was La Isla Bonita by Madonna. Helen recognized it in the first seconds, not just by the melody, but by the memory that came with it, intact after so many years. At 19, she danced to this song alone in her room, with a colorful scarf on her head and windows open to the street. She imagined that one day someone would see her that way, free, authentic, without masks, and choose to stay. But do we need someone to choose us? When we finally learn to choose ourselves? On the dance floor now, there was no scarf, but there was wind. One of the fans spun above her, spreading air and light among the bodies, creating an artificial breeze that moved her hair, as if it were ocean wind. And Helen danced like that audience-less adolescence, with closed eyes, loose arms, hips guided by the memory of what was good, what was true. The years dissolved. There was no longer the 57-year-old woman who lives alone, nor the 19-year-old girl who dreamed of being chosen. There was just her, ageless, timeless, without explanation. Gradually, something revealed itself there on the dance floor. There was no longer the emptiness from before, nor the fear of after, nor the need for fulfillment that brought her there the first times. Just a light, deep presence, a kind of beauty that didn't ask for applause or explanation. For the first time, she didn't see herself as someone who was left behind, but as a place where life still wanted to dance. Like an island in the middle of the ocean. A beautiful island. One that time tried to hide, that empty days tried to erase, but that now came back to show itself. Not because of Rick, not because of a romance, not because of anyone, but because, inside her, there had always been fire. And fire doesn't go out. It just waits for the right wind to shine again. Have you discovered that the person you are looking for was inside you all along. The music continued, and Helen continued with it. She spun, laughed alone, let her body lead. Some looked at her, others didn't. But she danced like someone who no longer needed to be explained, like someone who had finally chosen herself. When the last song played, Helen didn't want to leave. She stayed a little longer, sitting near the dance floor, barefoot with her heels in hand, makeup slightly smeared, hair out of place. But there was a peace there that she hadn't felt in a long time. Around her, people were starting to leave. Some still laughed loudly. Others exchanged phone numbers. Helen didn't look for Rick, didn't miss him. What she was looking for, finally, wasn't someone to accompany her. It was a place where she could find herself. The neons still flashed in the corners. Violets, greens, blues. The light trembled on the wooden floor like water. And for a second, Helen saw herself there, reflected in that irregular glow. A woman who danced, who returned, who now knew. She no longer needs to wait for life to come looking for her. She can go meet it. And that night, she did. If you recognized yourself in Helen, if you're also relearning to love yourself, tell us in the comments. Your story could become our next video.